Gabe Feldman, the law professor extraordinaire at Tulane, is now on the Rich Eisen show live. That's what the league is saying, Gabe. All of these aggravating circumstances has caused them to make these rulings. Is that within their purview of the collective bargaining agreement to do?
Well, that's the funny thing about the collective bargaining agreement is it gives tremendous discretion to the commissioner. And so there are no clear boundaries to what the commissioner can do. And the NFL Players Association agreed, as we remember back in 2011 negotiations, to give the commissioner the power to investigate misconduct off the field and then discipline the player as he sees fit in his sole discretion. And then, as we know, any appeal goes back to the commissioner. So the players gave him this broad right, and the question is what are the outer boundaries of those rights? And there's nothing to say that the commissioner can't do this, not only for the underlying offense, but also because the commissioner believes that Adrian Peterson hasn't shown remorse, hasn't been cooperative, hasn't given over documents. And so the commissioner has an argument that he has the power to do this, absolutely.
But Marcus in San Francisco just called and makes a very salient point that when it's all said and done, though, the matter that is in front of the commissioner's desk, court of public opinion aside, is a misdemeanor that he pled no contest to that makes no mention of a child. So how can the commissioner go ahead and just say, this is not only not time served, what you had while we were waiting for you to plead no contest to a misdemeanor, but it's now all the way through to next April 15th?
Because we know the commissioner, and again, the players agreed to this, that the commissioner isn't bound by the results of the legal process. And players can be suspended for misconduct that's not illegal. So not only does it not have to violate the law, but the commissioner doesn't have to follow what the court says. And just to throw a little bit of history out there, we remember the first commissioner, the first real discipline ever by the baseball commissioner, the players on the White Sox were acquitted, and yet they ended up being suspended for life by the commissioner. And those are the rules the players agreed to. They may seem unfair, but the commissioner gets to do the investigation. They are bound by different rules, different standards of evidence, different standards of proof. And the players agreed to those rules. It may seem unfair now, but the time to fight for that was during the collective bargaining negotiations. Of course, the players still have an argument that we agreed to certain rules, but you have to follow those rules. And the commissioner has tremendous discretion, but he's abused that discretion in this case.
Director of Tulane Sports Law, Gabe Feldman, joins me right now. So we're still waiting to hear the arbiter's ruling, Shyam Das. If he says that he can come off of the exempt list today, does that mean that he can, under appeal, play on Sunday, do you think, Gabe?
It's another great unknown. I think if he says that he has to come off the exempt list, the players would certainly argue that he has a right to play pending appeal. It seems like the NFL might argue that even though he's coming off the exempt list because the legal proceedings have been resolved, that he's now been suspended, and that the commissioner has the right to keep him off of the field pending the appeal of that suspension. I think that's an unknown. We don't know how the NFL will respond. And even if the NFL says that he has a right to play pending the appeal, it's not clear that the Vikings will play him. So this might lead to another battle, and a very quick battle, about whether he can be kept off the field pending the appeal. When Adrian Peterson right now in the PA is arguing, look, he's been suspended for 9 games. He might have been paid, but he's been suspended, and enough is enough, that this is an abuse of the commissioner's authority.
But to whom will they appeal?
Well, the appeal for that, I think they would argue that it goes right back to DOS and saying, look, your ruling should be broad enough to cover this particular situation. And it may be that the PA right now is asking DOS to say, look, before you issue that ruling, make it clear that he cannot be put on the exempt list even with this new suspension. So make it clear that in your ruling that if he comes off, he's off, and he's off pending the appeal.
And just recalling our days during the lockout, having conversations on NFL Total Access. Gabe Feldman, director of Tulane Sports Law. You also, if I'm not mistaken, conferred an honorary law degree on me a couple of years ago, correct, Gabe?
I did, but remember, it's not official until I sign it. I'm not sure it's been signed.
I don't know if that was intentional or not, but the reason why I bring that up is because you have helped me read these statements that come out from unions and leagues through the prism of sports law. Should we read the statement from the commissioner and the statement from DeMaurice Smith as setting things up for a larger looming legal battle on this matter? Am I reading too much into it in that regard, Gabe?
No, I think that's clearly where we're headed, unless they can reach some resolution where it certainly doesn't seem that that's in the cards. I mean, I think by adding on a 6-game suspension to this. The NFL knew they were inviting an appeal by the Players Association. They knew the Players Association would insist that the appeal goes to someone other than the commissioner. We'll see if the commissioner relents on that and maybe appoints Judge Jones again or somebody else. But if the commissioner decides to hear the appeal himself, I think it's very likely that this ends up in federal court.
So, but in the short term, though, we were discussing about a competitive issue. If things break that he's allowed to play against Green Bay, and then breaks after that where he's now suspended and doesn't play against the Lions, is that a consideration at all? The football competitive short-term 2014 season aspect of this?
I think that's always a concern in these cases, and this is why you have a commissioner making these decisions instead of the individual teams, because you're worried about the teams will make the decision based on their likelihood of winning any given Sunday, and the commissioner is supposed to be able to rise above that and look after the best interests of the league. But you also have to balance that against the rights of the players and the rights of the process that they agreed to, and if the process says that you get to play pending appeal, then you might have a situation where he's on the field one game and then off the field the next game, and that happens. That happens if it's a 4-game suspension versus a 5-game suspension. The teams that get to play against him when he's suspended get an advantage over those who get to play when the suspension ends. So this is not a new scenario, and this is contemplated by the rules.
Director of Tulane Sports Law, Gabe Feldman, last question for you, sir. Crystal ball it for me. How does this all play out? Shyam Das all the way through to April 15th, do you think?
Well, I think a reasonable result is that Das takes Adrian Peterson off of the commissioner's exempt list, and then there's a good argument that he should be allowed to play Adrian Peterson during the appeal. And the question, then the really big question, and my crystal ball is not clear enough to determine this, is whether Roger Goodell decides to hear the appeal himself or delegates it to a neutral arbitrator. I would suggest that he should delegate it to a neutral arbitrator because I think that will help it avoid getting into court. And really what I think the lesson the NFL hopefully has learned, if you hold on a little too tight, you end up losing control because the Players Association, not to quote 38 Special, but the Players Association is going to challenge that in federal court. If it goes to a neutral arbitrator, I think it stays out of court. I think it's in the league's interest to keep it out of federal court, but my crystal ball says these things tend to find their way to court, so we'll see.
Gabe, thanks. We'll chat with you down the line. Appreciate it.
Okay.
That's
Thanks,
Gabe Feldman, Director of Tulane Sports Law.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern. On Audience.